Alright, let's talk about Agnon. This is the fourth character in what I like to use as a flying team that is Agnon, Lorelei, Niveus, and Alrakis. He finds his way into quite a few other teams. You'll see that Agnon comes up quite a bit, especially for his rarity. Most of these upper end players, the top end players, are using primarily like legendary or legendary across the board. But Agnon comes up surprisingly often in their team compositions. Got a lot of value that I think you'll find over time. Just some specific things that make him highly survivable, capable of doing a lot of damage, and I think those are kind of the two things that really make it him a great addition to many teams. So we'll talk about some of the traits and some of the things here. We'll step through. Not a ton of traits, so it shouldn't take too long to get through. Magical, he's taking less damage from non-physical attacks. Living Stone, so he is a construct, which makes it maybe slightly more difficult to heal, but as it turns out for a lot of these things, we're not doing single target healing anyway. He still heals from, you'd say, passive healing, something like runes that do like a end of the turn healing. He can still heal that way. And also from non-targeted healing, so like Lorelei's healing of all flying characters at the end of each turn. He can heal from that as well, and that can keep his health topped up. But at the same time, he's invulnerable to all debuffs, which is huge to really help his survivability. Usually, constructs have pretty good stats, like starting stats as well. Flying allies, so Dark Skies here, flying allies deal extra damage to non-flying allies. And again, this is part of the synergies that we talk about with the team that I mentioned a minute ago that's a flying-based team. There's a lot of defense, like defensive synergies, and also these attack synergies as well. All right, Granite Form. This is, I would say, again, I always talk about what are the key things for these characters that set them apart from the rest. There's over 100 possible characters you could play now, or you could have on your teams, and a few of them are rising to the top that are used much more commonly. Agnon is one of those, and this Granite Form, he uses it in a couple different ways or a couple different places. This is one of the things. So he starts the dungeons in Granite Form, so similarly starting PvP matches in Granite Form, greatly reducing damage taken. Granite Form can't be stolen or copied. So, and this really is greatly reducing. It's not like the flying or armored or something like that might be a 35% reduction. This is like 95% or something, just massively reducing damage, and then likely stacks with all the other damage reduction. So when he's in Granite Form, it's just very hard to do any significant amount of damage. So he has Flying 2, he takes less damage from melee attacks. Stone Etcher ignores damage reduction on stoned targets. We'll talk about stone targets here in a minute. Boosted damage versus stone targets. So he has the ability to turn targets into stone and then can do even more damage, and also ignores their damage reduction. I mentioned, constructs usually have pretty good stats as it is. He's got high dark resist, spirit, a little bit of spirit resist, a little bit of lightning resist. You can see some modification on some of these as well. By the time I got to Agnon, he was one of the last ones I ascended, and I've already used some of my best runes on other characters, so I don't really have great stuff on him yet, but I'll be working on it over time. If we go to his abilities, these are, again, things that really help out. The basic attack, this is having the ability to petrify targets and enter Granite Form is a huge benefit for him. And so I think as I'm working on collecting runes and assigning them to the team and everything, there are some runes that will give you a higher chance of hitting your epic attack. Normally I think you're going to max out, I think it's at 20%, and then there are some runes that can boost that by another like 15% or something. Those likely would stack if you had more than one that did that. Those are higher end runes, they're harder to get a hold of, but this is one of the characters where it would be really helpful, because you've got this chance to attack up to 2 other targets for additional damage, and petrifying the targets is key. So your debuff, it's like entirely taking them out for that time that they're petrified, and he can do more damage to them, and then entering Granite Form. As I just mentioned, it's very difficult to do almost like any amount of like appreciable damage on him when he's in granite form. So if he's doing attacks and going into granite form, healing up at the end of each turn, going back into granite form, you're doing almost no damage. I've gone against a well-runed Agnon where you got down to the last character. It was just Agnon. I've got like 3 members left or something, and I still couldn't take him out. Eventually, he took the whole team out because he's just impossible to take any real amount of damage. I think he got lucky a few times with a couple extra like epic attacks that turned him back into granite form, helped him heal back up. But it was really, really hard to deal with this single character, 3 versus 1, and that's kind of part of his power. So Plummeting Doom, I'm sure everybody's been on the receiving end at least of Plummeting Doom. You can take an enormous amount of damage, especially if you've got it on, like if you're taunting and it's on a tank or something like that with very high defense. He does extra damage, so just when you thought you were safe, he's coming out and doing even more damage. Lift him up and they fall, and you just hope him doesn't kill him out in one, or kill him in one drop. So that can be frustrating, and also it's only a 3-turn recovery, so it happens fairly quickly. Terror Storm, another one to be feared because of that chance of fear. So if you're going PvP against Agnon, if he gets to Terror Storm, he can fear your characters right off the battle. And so it doesn't happen too often, but if you have one character that runs off, you're down. As soon as you lose even one character, it can really turn the tide. So that part's a bit of a pain as well. And deals extra damage to armored enemies. I'm not pairing him up with any allied constructs. There'd be a little benefit there, but even on his own with this other flying team, there's just a ton of value. Hardened Assault, 3 turns in, he's doing a lot of damage, and 2 additional attacks on the enemy with the highest defense, lowering defense on enemies hit, and entering granite form. So again, when he enters granite form, if he's healing each turn, then it's especially, he could get him down to a certain level, but he's healing a certain amount of return, and when he hits granite form, you're going to do almost no damage to him, and he just did some damage to you. So really survivable. High-end Agnons are really hard to deal with, which is why it's great to have him on your team. So that's really the big thing. You can see over here, his primary is to defense, and then increase to attack and health. His basic attack is just very dangerous. If you can get that up so that you're hitting your epic, any reasonable amount, turning your petrifying targets. You can have a couple targets because he's hitting multiple enemies petrified in a given round, and just really can change the tide in the battle. So that's what I really like about him. That's kind of what I wanted to share in terms of an overview for Agnon. He's not that hard to get a hold of. There are some of the events where I've seen it as good as like 10,000 event currency for 10 tokens, and you can, if you're getting 250,000, you could get, I think it maxes out at 10, so you get about 100 tokens for him in that event, and so I could get him to the next star level. And even having him to 3-star tells you I've done a few of these, and working him up isn't that difficult. It doesn't cost that much, so not a terribly difficult character to use in terms of getting a hold of stars, and boost his stats and things, and incredibly helpful in a lot of areas of the game, especially PvP. So that's it. That's all I want to say about Agnon. Thanks again for watching. If I forgot anything or any other synergies or things, please leave them down in the comments. We will pass them on, and I'll talk to everyone soon.